In 1999, the Sega Dreamcast was released in the United States. It was Sega's last console ever made. It followed the unsuccessful Sega Saturn, and this was their last chance to make a comeback in consoles. It was received very warmly. At first, it looked like it would be successful, but it wasn't. And here's the real reason why. Sega would say it was because the PlayStation 2 had stole their customers, but no. It was because the console was messing with people's minds, mostly because of one game in particular: schizophrenia. Don't bother looking for videos or screens of the game. They've all been erased. If you dig deep enough, you might find a scrap of info. All of my info comes from a guy who played the game, the man who used to work for Sega, and police reports. Note, the two men I've talked to get this information requested that their names be withheld, which they will. This is a story of a man who played the game, written just as it was spoken. I remember the game had amazing graphics. Even today they would hold up. The game starts without telling you a thing. You wake up in an old, run-down, abandoned insane asylum. You are strapped to a bed and you must struggle to break free. Once free, I then walked over to the door of the room. I had to force it open. When the door finally opened, it made a very loud screeching noise. The hallway outside the door was extremely dark. To progress in the game, I had to find a fuse box to get the lights back on, and I had never gotten that far. He laughed dryly, then continued. One of the creepiest things about the game was that there was no music, just the sound of wind, falling debris, my footsteps, and breathing. The disturbing voices that never stopped whispering, laughing, and crying. It took a while, but once I focused, I found the hallway was filled with rotting corpses. I swear some of them would even move. This creeped me out big time. As I'd be playing, every now and then I'd lose control of the character. He'd grab his head or scream in pain, and a very creepy picture would flash on the screen. This scared and disturbed me after a while. He paused and shook his head. The memory of the game still scared him, it seemed. This game was fucking with my head. I saw shadows move through the game, the screen would glitch and twitch, and I could not shake the feeling of being watched. Then something happened that changed the way I looked at life forever. I finally reached this point where I couldn't play the game anymore. I remember I told myself, this goddamn game is too fucking scary, I can't play this anymore. I then stood to turn off the game, and at that moment I was violently slapped in the face and pushed back in my chair, and I heard this demonic voice from the game that said, play. I screamed and ripped the console off the table onto the floor. I'd never been so scared in my whole life. Filled with fear, I left my house and didn't return for 2 days. When I did come home, I burned the game onto a pile of burnt plastic. It was one of the lucky ones. In the years 2000 to 2007, there were over 200 cases of men, women, and children being found either mutilated, in a state of shock, or dead after playing this game. There were also 50 cases of people becoming violent, suicidal, and withdrawn from playing the Dreamcast. So with sales actually dropping, they used the drop in sales as an excuse to pull production of the Dreamcast in 2001 in the United States and 2002 in Europe. The Sega Dreamcast was in production in Japan until 2007, however. What followed was one of the biggest cover-ups in recent history to erase all evidence that schizophrenia had ever existed. Below are 2 stories of what happened to 2 young men after they played schizophrenia. Their names have been withheld, of course. These stories have been taken from police reports. I had just gotten the game. Schizophrenia was very eager to play it, and so I put it into my Dreamcast and waited. One odd thing about it was that there was no title screen or the names of any developers or studios that worked on the game. It just started right up. In the game, you started off strapped to a bed. After breaking free and leaving the starting room, you must then find a way to get the lights to come on. After wandering in the dark for about 2 hours, it seemed, you were finally able to find this fuse box, and using that, I'd just gotten the lights back on. When the game started freaking out, the screen was fuzzing up, twitching around, and the character in the game fell to his knees and grabbed his ears and just began screaming. And then I saw him. A tall, skinny shadow man. His eyes were huge, about 3 times that of a human's eyes, so I called him the Watcher. He slowly drifted up to the man in the game and grabbed him by the neck. The Watcher then stared deeply into his eyes, then vanished. The voices in the game that never stopped whispering went from inaudible to just audible. All they said was suffer, 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 and that creeped the hell out of me. So with that, I got off the game. That night I dreamed I was in this asylum, wandering in the dark, lost and alone, and the Watcher found me. He grabbed me by the hair and dragged me into a room and strapped me to a bed. He then began to stare into my eyes. Ugh, those fucking eyes. He pauses for a moment. Those goddamn eyes. Sorry. After he stared into my eyes, I could hear the word suffer, suffer, suffer repeat over and over in my head. The Watcher then drifted to the door. He looked back at me, and he had the smile. The fucking son of a bitch smiled at me. Then, he called out into the hall, in a language I couldn't understand, and after that, four extremely skinny individuals, I guess they were patients of the asylum at one point, rushed into the room and ran up to me. They began biting and ripping at my hands and feet, and I could feel and hear my flesh tear away from my bone cracking and crunching in between their teeth. The pain was unbelievable. I'd never screamed so loud as I did then. Then I woke up. A feeling of relief washed over me and left just as quickly because the pain hadn't stopped. I screamed even louder this time because I knew what was going on. My mom and dad had come rushing into the room. I was under my blanket, and I couldn't move my arms or legs. They were strapped down. My mom ran over and pulled the blanket off me. She started screaming and crying uncontrollably. My dad's eyes were wide with anger and horror, and his skin was white with fear. And when I looked down and saw what I already knew, my hands and feet had been eaten away. Sadly, this man died, so he couldn't give this testimony to police about what had happened to him. But he did tell his brother before he died how bad schizophrenia had scared him, how the strange shadowy man had grabbed the man in the game and stared into his eyes, and how the voices began to say, die, 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 die. The following is a police officer's description of what he saw upon entering the room. The victim was 17 years of age, 130 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes. Upon entering the room, the victim's body was laying on the bed. He was strapped down to the bed by his arms and legs with belts. A large amount of his body had been eaten. We know this from multiple sets of teeth marks all around the body. The face had been eaten off completely. A large portion of the arms, chest, and stomach had been eaten as well. His intestines had been strung throughout the room. The coroner concluded the cause of death was blood loss, and from the lack of drugs in his system, this man appeared to have been eaten alive, with no sedative applied. Alright, so this is on a fine line. Now, of course, being a shitpasta episode, I don't like to blatantly say these things are completely horrible. I love shitpastas because they're always on the fine line. They can always be really great or really bad. They can always go from this horrible state that they may be in, the state where they're full of cliches, or they may be too far-fetched, where they're just so hammering in these creepy elements that they just work completely against them, to the state where they can be up there with some of the better creepypastas out there. Now, this reminds me a lot of Maria's Revenge, and obviously I'm making that connection a lot through the Sega Dreamcast. For whatever reason, I keep putting Sonic with the whole Sega Dreamcast. Anything Sega related just instantly ties me to it. But I don't know why, there's this feeling that it's got this weird connection, even though it doesn't with that creepypasta, and I cannot forget it, so I had to make that mention. But reading into it, I actually did enjoy the first half of this creepypasta. I love it when gaming creepypastas go into this conspiracy phase where they touch on these gaming consoles or these video games, typically older ones, and they attach this conspiracy to them where sometimes, considering how well it's written, it actually seems pretty plausible. And that always puts me into the state where I keep thinking about the very possibilities of these games and these consoles having these weird conspiracies occur, and because I keep thinking, it leads my mind into these very horror-esque areas, and that's just what makes it creepy in general. Usually I find those to be the very interesting creepypastas, typically in the gaming side. Now, reading this one, it follows on suit, but except it uses a game called Schizophrenia. Now, this would have been fine, but in the creepypasta, there's no fucking mention at all of Schizophrenia being the sort of test game that they release. In fact, it was downright showcased that it was somewhat public at one point, and looking into any news about Schizophrenia, there's actually nothing I could find. Apparently the game has no existence. I couldn't find that Schizophrenia was anywhere on the market. Looking into some of the fan-made lists of total Sega Dreamcast games, considering, they add the ones that are not only released officially, but add the ones that are even beta phases or games that never went gold, but they still existed at one point, Schizophrenia is never mentioned. So, there are two possibilities. Either there was actually a cover-up, or of course this was an inventive plot device for the creepypasta, and that's what I'm not comfortable with, With the creepypasta, I understand, I've always told you guys, you have to have a suspension of disbelief going on, but here we never had any build-up as to what Schizophrenia actually was. In fact, there was really no build-up at all. Whenever there was build-up, it's like, we reach this peak, we go down, and then we also go to this peak again, we go down. It's not a build-up, it's more of going up and down, up and down, up and down. It's like a weird roller coaster ride that never really peaks to begin with. But going back to the suspension of disbelief, you have to put yourself again in the state where you have to let certain cliches, certain things happen, because obviously, these are campfire stories, but they're fake stories nonetheless, and you have to sort of go in with that mindset. But here, because, again, these are supposed to have some form of reality tied to them, again, being the internet campfire story that they are, coming across something in the sense coming across, any sort of game that is touted as real, but it actually isn't, and as soon as you finish reading the story, you go up and look up what Schizophrenia is, and you find out there's nothing, and it's all, sort of BS, it just goes against you. What really got to me, though, was really the end phase of this creepypasta, when you come across the fact that somebody's being eaten alive and all this crazy shit is happening. Look, even back then, even with massive Illuminati-level cover-ups, this stuff wouldn't fly. We'd all have known about it at any point, and Sega's legacy would have been just that, a complete legacy. That company wouldn't be around no longer if their products got linked to this shit. And at the end of the day, too, you also have to wonder, why the hell would Sega even do this? Like, what kind of a game is being developed to the point where it's causing, death? What is the ulterior motive behind this? Is this the Manhunt 2 project? Or, is this actually Sega being Sega or something? There is nothing that really truly makes sense. There's nothing that is giving any backing to, but at the end of the day, again, I think this could be a great creepypasta. Of course, the beauty of a shitpasta episode is that we're not assholes. We're not looking for every bad side of it. We're not saying this is totally horrible. It can be redeemed, and it can be redeemed if you actually take the Dreamcast and take the time to make a proper conspiracy about it. And that's why, going earlier into the analysis, I kept thinking of the Maria's Revenge creepypasta. There was something about that creepypasta that really struck me, too. It's almost like, taking that creepypasta's tenet of bringing this weird hack-type game into the scenario, and tossing this alongside with it too. If you can apply that level of mystic storytelling where it's somewhat real, but of course you'll understand that it's also a story, and apply it to this where you have a game, you have a console, and you're really applying this conspiracy to it that is shrouded in reality. All of the events that could have happened in this were realistic rather than people being fucking eaten alive and whatnot. This would have been decent. I would have loved to see a conspiracy story about the Sega Dreamcast. It really would have been sweet, touching on something really creepy or something that is actually real, like a beta version of a game, but actually touching upon it so that there is a creepy backside release to it that none of us could have proven or disproven, and that would have added to the spooks. But I'm going to end this analysis over here. There's nothing really more I can say about the Dreamcast creepypasta than that things that should be changed should actually be changed. I think this could be a much better creepypasta. I think if expanded on and revised, and the build-up not be a bunch of constant ups and downs, it could be absolutely amazing. But as it stands right now, these are things that I personally find needing fixing, and I would like to ask you what you would think needs fixing too. Let me know in the comment section below. What would you rate this? What would you change it to make it better? And all that good stuff. As always, I ask you for one of these episodes. Please let me know. And for the author of this creepypasta, good job. It's on the fine line over there, but I think it can be really, really amazing. I'm going to end this shitpasta episode right over here. This has been another episode of Haunted Gaming. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. This is me, Mutahar, and I am out.